Yeah,
Right.
everyone is muted. Who's not muted then? Who's not muted? That's because you present her.
and the implications for the governance proposal of those strategies. Arta Runge-Metzger from DG Klima in the European Commission, talking about how 2030 and the long-term plans fit together, and how that piece is going to work, and the experience of the MMR, and that plays into this. And then Michel from the Parliament, the Greens advice is going to be responding to those presentations. So without further ado, as I said, if you could save questions till we've got through all of those opening presentations, and then we'll pick up Q&A from there. And with that, I will hand over to Imke. Thank you very much.
Very hard to understand.
Yeah, just got yeah, project, as said, looks into carbon development strategies, which are under the monitoring mechanism regulation, and the aim of this project is to facilitate, to evaluate these strategies and to facilitate learning amongst member states, and to inform and raise awareness around long-term strategies with other stakeholders, business communities, civil society. EO is receiving these funds, but we are working with a broad community supporting us in that, in terms of having an external reference group as well as our European network. Yeah, to what is this project about? As I said, at the core of this project are long-term strategies, the low-carbon development strategies. When we got this project, the political situation was quite different. It was before this project was approved, before Paris Agreement, and before the governance proposal of the Commission was out. So quite different in terms of how we envisaged this project and how the attention given to long-term strategies has been. This is was a bit of a game changer, but in a positive sense for this project, as it requires to link it to the current political discussions. Why have I put up this slide? I think it's just gives a bit of a sense of what is around in terms of terminology and also obligations from EU member states to deliver a long-term strategy. So I mentioned this project started or has a mandate to look into this development strategies under the monitoring mechanism regulation from 2013. The first time these strategies states were asked to deliver these strategies was in March 2015. The assessment, the results which I present are look exactly into what has been up on the what has been submitted by this date. Okay, what is the second mandate the EU took by ratifying the Paris Agreement is to deliver a long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy to set out and formulate and communicate how they plan to implement the Paris Agreement, to stay in line with holding temperature well below 2 degrees and efforts for 1.5. So, and there is a governance proposal which came out 13th of November last year, and with another term which is long-term low emission strategy with a 50 years perspective. But I think we have time to get more on this a bit later. And within this context, for us the question came up, how can we, as we are asked to provide learning, what is the right place and the right name and the right frame for what we are doing. This is why we've looked into the technology, and we, for us, felt, because it's not like stick the low carbon development strategies, but finding hooks and ways of delivering the learning from these projects. These are the venues, and we felt that the terminology of 2050 low emission development strategies reflect how we see a good long-term planning and how we define it ourselves. More that in the final project in the study, which comes out beginning of April. But just to say, it's an important discussion and important point to think about what are we going to address with these long-term strategies and how do we call them. What we've done, as I said, our task was to assess the low carbon development strategy submitted under the MMR. I'm showing you kind of a slide of what has been done. We have been in this project thought about an ideal long-term strategy plan, low carbon development strategy, and with Ecologic, Ecologic developed a methodology to assess these low carbon development strategies based on our ideal assumptions of how they should look like. I just want to make you aware of the three elements on the right side of this slide, which is we have elements which refer to the substance of this strategy, the credibility and the process. And we have these three indices, then 10 criteria. So the three indices are broken down in these 10 criteria, which I will look into with more detail a bit later. And they are substated with 48 criteria. I think it's important to mention we've looked into ambition, we've looked into the scope of the plan, we've tried to understand how actionable is the plan, we've looked into how much is it integrated in other institutions and other countries' plans, into the political commitment of the country, how is the plan monitored, public transparency, the process transparency, what is the analytical basis, and what is foreseen in terms of review. What are the assessments? First of all, only 11 from 28 member states, only 11 submitted what we consider an LCDS. So an LCDS, we've put 4 elements to define what is a low carbon development strategy. Sorry, using LCDS goes a bit quicker. Is there a time horizon up to 2050? They have actions defined. Is there a public consultation, and is there an analytical basis? We've defined these as essential elements in order to say this is a low carbon development strategy. So we had more member states submitted different kinds of documents to the EEA, which basically is the place where member states have to submit, but only 11 qualified. Here's a range, and this is, I think, interesting from the results, the wide range of quality. So the scores you see on the left side from 25% of how we scored the criteria up to 77%, which just gives a sense of the quality of the plans is wide-ranging, and there's no it's a sign of lack of guidance and really different approaches chosen, leading to very different qualities according to our criteria we have set. On the right side, we've looked into how has been the performance across the 7 member states on these 10 criteria, and you can see on the upper part it's public transparency and ambition have been the two criteria which have been reached or delivered quite well, whereas the actionable the criteria plans actionable, are they actually credible in terms of how they set out to reach what they want to reach? They score very poor, as well as on the political commitment. So which means it's more kind of a box ticking rather than a real politically embedded strategy. Okay, just to show one thing you've seen, France ranked first in terms of overall scoring, but just to show this is an example, high ambition. It does not lead and is not sufficient to have a good plan. You can see Denmark, Finland, Germany, which all scored quite much poorer. They have high ambition, but it doesn't mean it's a good plan. So it's requiring much more. Other recommendations are the key findings we take from this report. Less than half of the EU member states have covered a plan. This is, I think, not what the institutions have foreseen, and the member states themselves committed to do so. So there is a question of how can we enforce this? How can member states be motivated, or how can the law be enforced that they actually submit these frameworks? It seems this is a sign that the political backing of the LCDS has not been really well. We have to see how they perform now. Basically, they have on Wednesday there was a second deadline for delivering the review of these plans. Every second year they have to deliver them, but the enforcement question is quite important. Otherwise, it's not a very credible exercise for Europe. So I mentioned already the wide range of quality of plans. So this points towards the need of recommending, giving templates and guidance to member states in order to ensure there is a level of quality secured in these low carbon development strategies or any long-term strategies, because this complex exercise can be approached quite differently. So there is a role to take this up, and this leads also to the governance proposal, which currently has not much of guidance in the proposal yet, and I think the results show there is more needed. So I mentioned already, the ambition does not always mean it's a high quality. I think the recommendation from our side is this an exercise to or long-term plans are set up to ensure we get where we want to be mid-century. So also for implementing the Paris Agreement, this needs to be ensured, but there are more things to be done. So public transparency, member states scored high on that. This needs to be guaranteed and maintained for the next strategies to be delivered. We see there is a range of member states in terms of integrating with others. So it's very necessary not to look only into the energy sector. It's long-term strategies required to have an economic, social, and environmental link and integration. This is not a given, as we've seen from the evaluation. Clear and fully involve stakeholders into the development of those strategies to, first of all, create public acceptance, and to have a structured and strategic approach seems to be necessary. You see 7 of 11 have done it not well in the evaluation. So this is an important element, we think, in terms of creating the public acceptance and taking people along of what member states are doing. Covering all sectors, this is important. We know there are sectors which haven't been addressed very much yet. For example, the whole land use sector is something which needs to be brought in the next decades. So it's a whole economy approach. approach. So regular monitoring and review. The commitment, I mentioned that as a difficult thing, as it's only 9 of the 11 haven't really shown there is political commitment behind the plans. Our recommendation is to have legally binding long-term targets and implementation in member states to make sure that the government and the member states are committed behind that. Details for implementation. How can plans be made actionable? This is important and also links very much to the question, how can we connect the long-term planning with the shorter-term planning? Because basically we need to have a longer-term planning and then translate it into shorter-term actions and break that down. This is very important and has been scored prominently in this evaluation. Exchange between good practices. It's a complex exercise. It takes a lot from member states in terms of setting up credible plans. So we need to have good best practices for countries and ensure that we have an exchange and facilitate this exchange is important. Last slide. What are the conclusions for the Energy Union governance proposal? Proposal needs to reflect better what has been learned from the exercises under the low carbon development strategies, but also there are other projects and other countries and other guidance around. This should reflect better in the governance proposal, and also, as said, more guidance is needed in terms of ensuring good quality comes out from member states' work. Supportive actions from Commission and between member states and third countries. We think the 2050 time horizon is very relevant in terms of Paris implementation and also what is required in terms of climate science, that we need to be net zero by mid-century. So we think lead to later is a problem. We should focus on 2050. We know there is a risk that things get slipped to later anyway, but I think that's a very, very important time horizon, and a link between the long-term planning and the shorter-term planning, in this specific case the national climate and energy plans, is basically to be reverted in the order that we should have a long-term goal, an agreed long-term goal for 2050, as the risk of having stranded asset and really looking into the pathways for too long is a risk we can mitigate by putting the 2050 dimension first. Thank you.
That was incredibly rich, and clearly there's a lot to comment on and respond to. But Oliver, do you want to let up?
Fine. So I hope people can hear me. Can you hear me on the line? Yep. Okay. Thank you. The here is because at the time as the Maximizer project has been going on, ERI, which is a Paris-based think tank where I work, has also been doing a project together with Ecologic, a Berlin-based think tank, evaluating and examining in more detail some individual long-term experiences of 2050 planning in EU countries, and so work out what are the examples of best practice, what things can go right, what things can go wrong, and how, and what the implications are for this new governance regulation that is being developed at EU level. And so what's positive, I think, first of all, is that there are a lot of similar images that emerge, I think, from the work that Imke has presented and what we've found. So, for example, I very much like just the conceptually of substance, process, and credibility, because that's exactly what we're finding is crucial. Perhaps just to explain our study, and then in a bit more detail first. So basically, we looked at we had just a handful of case studies, a small group of member states, so just the UK, France, Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland. We started looking at Denmark as well, but their planning process went into reverse during our project, so we abandoned that pissed a little bit. And so I think what we discovered was a couple of things. I think firstly, these long-term plans, they have a very, very useful technical function. They're at one level. So, and we need to be a bit precise about what we mean about that. So there's a tendency to think, we need 2050 planning because we want to be coherent between the long-term and the short-term actions. Okay, that's true. And that means basically avoiding, some people say, that means avoiding lock-in, right, of carbon-based assets and so on. Well, that's true, but it's also a bit more complex than that. And the things we found is there's a few different technical functions these long-term plans can play. One, of course, is just this question of the cost of the overall decarbonisation strategy. Right? So that's partly about lock-in, but it's also about other things. So, for example, how much you're able to do on decarbonising energy has implications for how much you do on energy efficiency, for example. And so you can start to actually put these elements in play. Sit and say, well, how much you can decarbonise electricity, interaction with how much you can electrify things like heating or transport, right? And so there are fundamental elements like this that need to be put side by side on a sector-by-sector basis to have a coherent picture of your overall transition. And I think the things we notice is that when countries actually do this process seriously, and they do this from work from 2050 to today, they get very different results for how to put those pieces of the puzzle together that they were getting before they did that process. Revealing. Example, if you take a country like France, they had a big national energy debate of the COP in Paris in 2015. One of the interesting things was that they ended up in the end with an energy law that describes targets for energy efficiency and renewables for 2030 that are actually more ambitious than what the EU would require of them, right? And so that's actually sort of suggesting that once you do the process seriously, you get different results, and that then informs your policy process in a different way, right? There are some other conditions around being able to implement that and how to make that happen, but I think it's an interesting insight. Second, I think what's important when you do these plans is that you need to track progress, right? It's a dynamic process putting in place a long-term climate strategy. And if you have a coherent long-term strategy, how can you track progress? How much, if we just look at the 2030 time horizon, are we doing enough to renovate buildings? Are we doing enough to decarbonise transport? Are we doing enough to put in place the right infrastructure for electric networks and so on? And in case where the plans were done well, there was basically a sector-by-sector breakdown. So transport, power, industry, of course, etc., where there was a strategy that became a benchmark for the government's sort of shorter-term policy. So carbon budgets, for example, in the case of the UK and France, the government overlays short-term carbon budgets to sort of motivate actions. That's its implementation. Question we talk about is how you go from the plan to the implementation. And so once you have the long-term framework, then you can have the short-term plans. And then you say, okay, so this is what we're doing, and then you can benchmark against some sort of real criteria. Otherwise, it's possible to sort of say, well, a little bit like this debate we sometimes have in the EU around effort sharing as well. Okay, well, maybe we can take some LULUCF credits over here, and we can take some ETS over here, and we're able to sort of avoid the mathematics of the situation, which you can't do, I think, if you have a credible long-term plan. It's important from an evaluation perspective, and so therefore, look, no country implements its plan perfectly, but if you have this as a basis, these issues can be brought to light and have a better chance of doing a good job than if you don't have a long-term plan. I think where plans are useful is that they, in a country like the UK or France, what we see is that there's a clear link between actual planning for investment, so the signals and economic incentives the government puts in place for investment, and the targets. That's important for investor confidence and investor perspectives. I think there are some other things that sometimes are overlooked, but where I think these plans could potentially be useful in the European context. So one example is thinking about, well, what enabling conditions for my country to be more ambitious. Right? So, in countries like Poland, for example, or the Czech Republic, what we see is that, and other countries, by the way, decarbonization is not the main policy priority. Okay, and that's understandable. But what's important for them is to say, well, to what extent decarbonize while also achieving our other goals. So, yes. So when you put these two elements alongside each other, you can then start to unblock some of the problems that you can face in terms of motivating ambitious climate policy, because you can actually demonstrate that in fact it's not impossible to be and also achieve these goals. So that's, I think, the technical side. And then I think I have about 1 minute left, but I think the aspect which is really important is the social function that plans play. Right. What we notice is that these plans in general, whether we're done very intensive engagement with stakeholders, that often was very useful for getting political buy-in into the decisions that emerged, or the elements that emerged in the plans, the subsequent climate law, in fact. So in France's case, a lot of planning was done ahead of the development of a climate law. That law was to be more ambitious because there was a large amount of buy-in into the long-term strategies that were put forward as part of this big national debate. So that, I think, makes better stability and reliability in terms of the mission, even though, again, no implementation is ever according to plan exactly. And then I also think what's interesting is that when you do this process, you have to confront difficult issues. So Germany had this criticized plan recently because they didn't really confront the coal issue completely, they really confront the transport issue completely, and so on. Yes, it's true, Germany's plan does have some problems, right? On the other hand, I think what's good about this, it shows that the process in a way works the way it's meant to work at a social and political level. It puts issues on the table. It structures a process for saying, okay, these are the issues we haven't tackled. These are the issues we have to come back to. These are the challenges that we face in these sectors that need to be unblocked somehow if we're going to go further. And you can have that discussion. So you also need to think about these things as a way of structuring a political and a process and a dialogue about ambition in the country, not just as a technocratic exercise where someone in the central government decides and then we sort of ignore the political challenges that we have to confront. And that was actually a theme that came across in several countries. I'll finish in just 1 second. So, and then there are some other things that are important to take in mind. Obviously, planning is just one aspect of climate governance. There's also the institutional framework. There's also what legal elements you put around the plans to sort of make, for example, make governments take seriously these plans. Because the UK, for example, there's this 2050 target, which the government is required to take into account when it does its carbon budgets and so on. So there's like that, which are also very important, which we shouldn't ignore. But I think I'll leave my comments there. But overall, I was very pleasantly, or I was not surprised. I was pleased to see that that we came up with similar conclusions to you guys.
Great, thanks very much, Oliver. That was an excellent minute.
Yeah.
Arthur, I'm going to hand over, and so that we've done the substance essentially. Now, obviously, Arthur, you want to reflect on the AR and various other experiences and how that's played into your work, please, from the Commission perspective.
Bottom line.
Click that one there. Okay, you should be on.
Okay.
Yep.
Everyone hear me? Super. What I want to do is look a little bit in terms of where we are coming from, and in terms of what lessons have we learned. What I see a lot with is that there is some like a learning process that we are engaging on. Even if you look at the monitoring mechanism regulation that is in place only for a couple of years, it is already version 3 of what we are doing in terms of monitoring and reporting in the EU. The first we started in 1993, and we had a revision after Kyoto. This one, the monetary mechanism regulation, came out in to respond to the Doha Agreement, how we implement the Doha Agreement. And with that, for the first time, that playing element came into play, the strategies, because that was a decision that was taken in Cancun that all countries are invited to do these low emission development strategies. It was the first time that member states felt comfortable to have that also in a piece of legislation. But if you read that piece of legislation very well, you will see member states are not reporting the strategy to the Commission. They provide information on where they stand in preparing their strategy. That just shows how sensitive this is in terms of the whole play, what is being decided in Brussels and what is going to be decided in the capitals. So it's definitely wanted to have this say on the national strategies, as little guidance as possible. The guide should be going as far as what we have agreed to under the UNFCCC, but not going further. But of course, we knew that we would come out with very different approaches in different member states. And I think the Maximizer project shows that very clearly, and also internally, when we are looking at this. Of course, all 28 member states have provided information at the point in time when they were supposed to provide information, but you rightly say there were only 11 who had adopted a strategy, a long-term strategy by then, and they looked all very different. I don't have to say anything in terms of the quality and how you assess them, because I've done that already quite wonderfully. Now, and what came in between is, who's in the slides? Okay, good. The next slide is the Paris Agreement. You see that at the bottom, and this agreement comes with this cycle of ambition. Every 5 years we have to ratchet up and so on. Very clearly, if you look at the monitoring mechanism regulation and the Paris Agreement, two things do not really fit with each other. And at the same time, of course, we already started seeing that, yes, we do strategies, but the strategies, as you rightly say, if you look at them, are not really actionable. So we need something more solid if we want to move forward. And the thing after Paris, I think for policymakers was, on the next slide, is the need to move into implementation. And you need to have plans. And plans will have to be built on the legal obligations member states have been taking. A lot of these legal obligations are currently in the proposals that are being pushed forward. So when you look at the INDC, is the INDC should inform the plans in terms of setting the objective, where do we need to go, and these plans need to be built very quickly, and at the same time we have to develop our EU legislation. And the plans, I think what we wanted to do there is to read this issue of integration. Seen in the past is that very often the climate guys are sitting alone in the ministries and are starting to dream up what is the plan and how are we going to implement it, and do a little bit of consultation with the colleagues in the other ministries. But if you want to have something solid, then you need to have a much stronger integration. And that we said, look, 80% of the emissions, that is number one. So therefore, let's put climate and energy together into a single plan. And of course, you have to be cognizant of the fact that when we look at energy, climate is not the only objective that you have. Energy security, you have the whole issue of the internal market in Europe, you have the whole issue on how you drive forward energy efficiency, renewable energy in that package. So all that will have to come together into a single plan. And I think that is the renovation in this proposal, because we didn't have that, a solid plan for the coming 10 years. What we, the member states, is that they have the draft plans by the beginning of next year. And when we listen to member states right now, they're all saying it can't be done. It's a short period. We need to consult, we have elections this year and so on. So for them it's going to be a difficult task. But what we and the reason why we have proposed 2018 early is in order to be able to tell the rest of the world we are doing something in order to implement Paris. As the draft plans can add up these draft plans at the beginning of 2018 and then see during the facilitative dialogue whether anything needs to be changed, anything more needs to be done. So you have this arrow that goes down from the plan to the facilitative dialogue in that, at the same time an arrow going up for the finalization of the plan is a possibility for member states to do something in between. And it's going to continue into the future because we said you have a kind of 5-year cycle, look at your plans again. And every time you come to the stock take, and from the stock take you can then go to the finalization of your plans, and that continues into the future. So the proposal is to really respect the 5-year cycle. And that's on the next slide, that is important, is that we need to strengthen the long-term strategies. You see up in the left corner there that, yes, in the year 2011-12, we did the carbon roadmap, an energy roadmap, and also a transport white paper that went until 2050, and that was the basis of setting our INDC. What is of us is the request by the Paris Agreement to come with a mid-century strategy by the year 2020. And we believe that this mid-century strategy needs to be informed by the results of the facilitative dialogue. So the ideal time is 2019-2020 to really have a hard look at our long-term strategy. And that long-term strategy, then you can see that can inform also the next cycle of your planning. It can inform the next NDC that you are going to take. And then every 10 years, the legislation says at the latest every 10 years, so there is some kind of flexibility built into that proposal. If member states think they should do that earlier, come back to the long-term strategy, then of course they can come back earlier. But at the latest every 10 years, we would have to update that, make sure that the new results of the IPCC and any scientific results move into this strategy thing. So there is a difference between strategy and plan. And very concrete, actionable, get forward, that is the commitment, and you have to discuss that very closely with your different ministries, but also with your stakeholders. So there's an element of public consultation there that's also mentioned in the proposal. The next 1 minute, that's going to be not hard, because the next thing then is, and I agree very much with Oliver, that having strategy, having plans is all nice and dandy. You need to control whether you are on track or not, and this is what the rest of the system does. And it also is an expansion of the current system, because we don't only look at climate, we add the wider energy objectives as well at the same time. We will have 2-year cycles in terms of reporting, and we have the possibility with the State of the Energy Union every year to look at progress in member states, and that's going to run into the future. So that's in terms of integrated monitoring reporting. Number 6 will then, if you turn to the next slide, will tell about the annual assessment of progress. So that will be done through the State of the Energy Union. The next slide is going to tell you we are going to check compliance, and that is different depending on the piece of legislation. So you have a strong compliance regime under the ETS, of course, which is annual compliance, under the SR, where we propose a 5-yearly cycle, and the LULUCF. And you have a separate one, energy efficiency and renewable energy, because the targets, as you know, member states want to have legally binding at the EU level, but they don't want to have national targets. So therefore, the methodology is different. And you see that in the yellow stream down there, where there will be an assessment of are states getting where they need to get to. If not, depending on what is the reason they don't get to it, we could make a proposal on how to close the gap, and that could be many things. So not saying what would be the measure, that will depend on what in actual fact is happening on the ground. The next slide then tells you how we are going to review the entire legislative framework, and that again sits together with the Paris cycle. So what we are foreseeing is that after the stock take, you would look at the legislation, all the different pieces, whether that is still efficient or not, and you can revise that. And the same you do with the kind of the second layer of legislation, which is the governance, which is the renewable energy and efficiency at a later point in time. And the last slide, or the second last slide, talks about the cycle. Then number 9, which is the last one, with an important element, and that is cleaning up everything. That it's not only about writing reports and sending data from here to there, but the more important part is the interactive part. The interactive part is the member states sit together in order to inform each other, look at what they are doing. So we have an Energy Union Governance Committee. The member states meet regularly and has subgroups work on individual chapters. We started in the early days with the inventories and projections. Now we have the ETS, we have adaptation, we have LULUCF, and we are going to add from the energy side is energy efficiency, renewables. So we'll have all the different topics being discussed among member states in a regulatory manner, which also will help to learn the lessons from important projects like the Maximizer project or even IDRI, and I would hope that at a certain point in time can invite you in order to bring your lessons you have learned in your exercises to the member states in order to show that there is more interest. It's not just member states, it's also the wider audience, whether it's civil society or whether it is business enterprises that can come and discuss with member states in this committee. Thank you.
Roger. Again, impressively fast run through the entire architecture of the climate governance of the European Union. It's good to have a civics lesson. Do you want to lay the politics on top of that, Michel, to some extent?
Thank you. Is it work? Oh, okay. I have 3 ability and the short-term calendar. Bad memory, I have to say, really bad memory. But I can understand the Commission has such a bad memory. What about agreement? When is decided again? 2015? No? Okay. So, at the governance structure, the long strategy, come on, guys. I mean, it's not a vision in line with the Paris Agreement. There is nothing about the 2050 targets, where we should go to. There should be a separate report for the national part. There is no into that. There is no way to achieve the Paris Agreement in long-term strategy you mentioned. You mentioned integration. That and climate. I'm dealing with energy, so ask question you want on climate, I will not answer then. Energy, I mean, we need integration. You're right. This is good about long-term vision about energy. I mean, there is only one article, badly written, which tackling only some part of climate. But we need to, as it was shown also by different studies, we have to reverse the logic. We need to know exactly what is our vision. What is target for 2050 in terms of climate, also in terms of energy. We need these tools together. Then, with this 20 in line with the agreement, in line with the Paris Agreement. So, and I'm happy to hear that we'll use, the IDRI report and the Maximizer report, so this is the logic to be followed. Memory. You taken all your decisions in terms of energy and the obsolete constitution. This conclusion are dated to October 2014. Before Paris. Do you remember Paris?
I do.
So member states do apparently have also a bad memory, because and it's the only thing you are moving a little bit away from the mandate given an early time was to insert the word binding in front of the energy efficiency target. How do you believe that with 27% renewables and 30% energy efficiency, you will achieve the Paris Agreement? How to people? And you will reach the Paris Agreement. So you have to reverse the logic, start 2050, and then go to the targets of 2050 in terms of efficiency and renewables, to say the least. You are a pledge and review system. The Parliament position is to have national binding targets on energy efficiency and renewables. It has been voted 4 times, even after the Paris Agreement, by Parliament. So we increase this. We need to make them binding at national level. So credibility. All about this energy package and so on, it's to empower the people. We need to empower the people. In the governance, you have, as Arthur, they have to draft their first national plan, the draft plans for 1st January 2018. Will they consult it or unconsulted through the administration? I believe that we can empower the people if they are not part of the process. Asking the member state to come with draft plan on 1st January 2018, it's not only a problem for member state, it's also a problem of credibility. As the studies have shown, we need to embark the people, the municipalities on board, and this has to be part of the governance structure. There is empowering the people in the governance regulation, as proposed. Because I go directly to the third point, I would call the calendar, because since I'm coming from the Parliament, I imagine that some of you want to on the Parliament, but you have on, or like Amy Claude Thomas always, where be that we have received the governance regulation, the correct governance regulation, not in November last year, but this month, has corrected and sent to the not to the Parliament. Well, I haven't received any full action, and us, the Parliament and the Council, at the end of the year. But is this corrected version sent to the Council? The final one is the final one, because we need to start on amendments. So I think we need not to confuse and quality. So it's to push the member states to have their draft plans. But can how the two institutions, Council and Parliament, to look at the template for the national energy plans, why are already asking no the mandate to come with a draft plan? What's the point to ask the two other institutions to come with a template? Right. So confuse speed and quality. Now, Parliament, we need time. We also acknowledge that the interinstitutional agreement between the three institutions to try to finish as soon as possible, and that's why, at least for the governance regulation, we have a very tight schedule to finish it, or at least, yeah. So I just want to invite all of you. First exchange of views in the ITRE committee next week, on the 1st of March at 9 o'clock. There, the rapporteur of the European Parliament, Mr. Thomas, will present his first general views. Hopefully the same thing as I did today, but I don't know. So we are drafting a working paper. We are in version 5 of the drafting paper. So, I suppose that Mr. T will finalize it during the weekend. So, and then we have in June we have a deadline to contact again the committees to consider the draft report of on governance, and we hope to have vote in the ITRE committee and the committee. That's another question after the summer break. So, speed we will follow. I mean, the instruction given by the institution, but I mean, we cannot be pressed in a way that we need to conclude all this by the end of the year. This is simply impossible. Simply impossible. I mean, trilogues we can conclude at EP level. Council may conclude at their level, but then there will be no time this year to conclude trilogues. I mean, I've been in the Parliament since 14 years, and so we have worked on the legislation, as you may know, and then so this is crazy. So I will end here.
Thank you very much, Michel. So we're going up for questions from the floor. I also would like to give maybe the chance to respond to some of that. So while we're thinking of questions, I'll let Arto respond to some of that.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. What I want to say is that I agree with Michel is saying. The ideal world out there where you say, yes, let's first draft a proposal on how to do a strategy, discuss that, bring that through all the institutions, member states a couple of years' time to do these strategies. It has been decided and vetted by everybody, then we can start doing plans. What if that meant for the implementation of the Paris Agreement? That probably we've been doing planning for about 4 or 5 years after 2015. Until 2020, much really would have happened. But at the same time, business is telling us we need to have the signals now. So please come with your legislation as quickly as possible. We are kind of trying to refurbish a train that is running. That we are doing, and we need to be pragmatic, and we need to cut some edges. When it comes to the timing of the adoption of the proposal, I'm probably as surprised as you when we saw the letter of the institutions, the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission saying we're going to do everything by the end of the year, and we try to kind of help and work hard, as I know the colleagues in Parliament are doing. But okay, that is a reality. But in terms of the what is the ideal thing, I think we share the same view around the table. Unfortunately, we think it is more important to show that you are implementing Paris. And that was also in view at the end of December 2015, that the elections in the US might not go in the way we would have, or many of you would have wished for. Because that also means we need to get on with implementation. If we would have waited, that would have been the perfect excuse for others to also wait, and they're not helpful in this whole exercise. So I think that wholly explains a little bit why it looks a little bit like reverse logic, but it is not. It's pragmatism that is driving that, with as much logic as we can add to that. But for the future, the legislation is on the table and it can be improved. On the national plans, this commitment member states already made, I think last year in the conclusions of the Energy Council. Everybody said, yeah, we are going to work on the plans. So we are not starting today, on the 17th of March 2017. They would have started a year ago because everybody knew about this. This was part of the Energy Union communication that came out, the conclusions that were drawn afterwards. So it's not a surprise.
I did, yeah. And then I'll open the floor. But I just think, I mean, I hear what Arthur is saying about the importance of being pragmatic. Can people hear me, actually? Yep. How I think pragmatism argument also cuts away, does it not, in the sense that if you want member states, for example, to be able to implement, they'll need to know what the parameters are of the EU legislation that they have to implement.
Yeah.
And so how will they get their ministerial colleagues, for example, to buy into something until the overall package is finalised? And so therefore, I find it hard to see how action can take place, even if there is some sort of vague semblance of a plan until that's finalised. So I'm not completely by the argument that we need to have the plan finalised by 2018 to show we're acting. In any case, this whole package is meant to begin after 2020. We're planning the 2020 to 2030 period. We still have a 2020 climate energy package, which we're implementing now. Yeah.
I want to respond to that. No, it's very important. No, what is important here is the work in terms of the main parameters of what's going to get onto the table. Members know since October 2014. That is when the decisions were made. On that basis, you can start doing your plan. When it comes to the it's very clear what you need to do under the ETS, and that is regulated, and that is not difficult. The plan is mainly there to look at buildings, transport, agriculture, and there it is very much left to member states on how they want to get to their targets. And when they decided we're going to cut the targets on a per capita basis, everybody can run a spreadsheet to see, okay, that is the margin where I'm going to land. So this is nothing that is rocket science. From that point of view, the information is there. And arguing for slowing down, and that's not good.
For quality, but I'll let people speak. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. My question is about how to deal with technology in different plans and long-term strategies by member states. Is there any example, any concrete initiative that incorporates the need to plan the technology development into the long-term strategies? My starting point is the workshop I attended last week organized at the Future of Steel Industry, and one of the things which struck me was the fact that all the researchers and the engineers from world-leading companies said we have very interesting breakthrough technologies emerging in labs, etc. But we will need time. We will need concrete instruments to help us to take them up front. But at the same time, we are competing on global markets, and we have that competitiveness requirements which we
So that was a question from Benjamin Denny from the European Trade Union Congress. And if I may shorten it just for the people online, the fundamental question is, how do you plan technology development, particularly industrial technology development, to your 2050 plan? Because obviously that's something of an uncontrollable element. Who would like to take a crack at answering that? Do you want to start?
Yes, that's a part of the novelty in terms of the governance proposal, because one of the 5 pillars of the Energy Union is research and technology development. So they will have to reflect on what they are going to do proactively, push technologies in terms of their development, but then also in terms of their deployment. It is for the first time a firm component of the plan.
Maybe I can add that. I mean, it's a good question because, as you say, often these are European industries or global industries even, and they're not in the control of just one member state. And so my sense is that this is an area where there is actually a need for sort of a complementary layer of I think, dialogue on how states together address some of these issues for these European sectors. I think from a member state's perspective, they need to be somewhat conservative. So, for example, my sense is what countries do is they try to work to the extent possible with technologies that are already more or less, envisaged already more or less as mature, likely to be mature in the next years or so. And then, to some extent, to look at efforts to further develop technologies. But again, I think a weak area of national defense because it's just on national policy. Yeah.
Oliver, we have a question online, I think. Yeah. So just so people did hear that, the question was, is the requirement or if be a requirement or support for 100% renewable energy into the plans? Arthur, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, I think Michel was referring to the target of at least 27% binding at the EU level that is being proposed. Of course, member states themselves in their national plans will have to articulate how they want to go on renewables in the coming decade. In terms of support, in general terms, for these strategy exercises, there is funding available at the EU level. So the same kind of the Maximizer project is funded LIFE program. Also, states have access to that LIFE program in order to do their strategic and planning exercises. So that can be done for energy and so on, whatever they want to do. And there's a number of member states that most of this.
You want to add to that point? Please.
Yeah, that's why I was referring before. I mean, you need to use the logic. First, you have to put a vision. When do you want to you have your 100% renewables? So, and in the governance, there's nothing like that. Having integration of climate and energy together, so you can add in 2050 also a new dimension, which is, for example, which would be the line of the Greens, 100% renewables by 2050. That has to be integrated in the vision together with the Paris Agreement, and then you build on this member state by member state at national level how to get to that point. Do I need to phase out coal, or do we build more offshore wind? That's depending on the different countries, and on track to have, the 100% renewable. So, for example, if I would recommend Poland phase out coal first, but I would recommend France and others, Denmark, Spain, and others. To build more, renewables plans. Most importantly, how do we get 100% renewables is only by seeing energy. This is the top priority for all methods, but this is not enshrined, embedded to the vision, and it's not embedded in the very weak targets on energy efficiency and renewables. If you go for 27 renewables and 30% energy efficiency, then forget about climate and the renewables in 2050.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to take another question and then I'm going to say Helen.
Thank you.
From Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership.
Thank you, and thanks to all of you for your comments. I wear several hats at CISL, one being Corporate Leaders Group and the other being the Green Growth Platform. And in my conversations with business, I sometimes have the impression that I'm a bit like being a nutritionist in an accident and emergency department in a busy hospital. They're aware of the importance, and they do understand clearly that the long-term investment angle, the signals that are coming are absolutely critical. But getting them to take it seriously when they're looking at quarterly results is sometimes a challenge. So my question really relates to the compliance aspect, perhaps to Arthur. The evidence that Imke outlined at the beginning regarding the experience so far from the other plans. So we've got 11 states that have actually done a serious plan. There are several that haven't. The quality of the plan is very variable. Apart from the sort of blaming and shaming perhaps during a State of the Energy Union in the future, what actual steps will there be to ensure compliance amongst the member states so that the term signals are actually going to be driven in a way that are going to be constructive for businesses when they get their long-term plans into the future? Thank you.
Please, Arthur, go ahead.
I think if you compare what we have been proposing, the governance proposal, compare the MMR. In the MMR, the low emission development strategies, as I said, was member states providing information on the state of preparation of the LEDs. The governance proposal says member states shall do this by a certain point in time. So from that point of view, you could launch infringement procedures. The question still is whether member states are going to accept that, because last time the word shall in that paragraph in the monitoring mechanism regulation didn't want to have. And that is something, hopefully, our Parliament will help us on this, stick to shall and to make it really actionable on our side. Because we think it is a very important element to have these long-term strategies for all the good reasons that you were mentioning before.
Thanks, Arthur.
Yeah, one question for you, Arthur. I think one of the elements which was surprising for us seeing the governance regulation is the 50-year plan instead of sticking to the 2050 timeline. I just want to ask this question and get some of the reasoning you had to put that, because we feel it's a risk behind that, kicking that to making it a longer time span. Delivering it, asking for delivery in 70. This is kind of in line with Paris, but also carrying a risk of just delaying action. We know there is always a risk of delaying actions, and what is the reason in terms of moving away? I think it's the message understood is yes, we need to think beyond 2050, and this means also look for it's a kind of a ring target to ensure compliance with Paris. It's not finished, but yeah, how can we stand that?
That's exactly the reason. The reason is that kind of looking until 2050, I think, you could be quite comfortable in terms of your planning. But the real things are going to happen immediately after 2050 or around 2050 and 2060. Particularly the whole question around agriculture, forestry, they're going to really bite. So we thought just to limit the strategy to 2050 and then also have in the legislation forever, or for I don't know how many years, would not be fine. So we said, okay, take a longer term look, go beyond 2050. But of course, for 2050, you should know what you need to do. For 2040, you should need to know, because that's all on the kind of trajectory. We are not only looking at the end point. What we wish to see is the trajectory on how you get there, and to see in the different sectors how are you going to get there. I think that is the important thing.
Can I quickly respond to that?
Yes.
I think there is no question around the rolling target and trying to move beyond 2050. But I think the political signal to give it 50 years plan is a different one. And this is what we see critical, not the fact that you want to make minds moving beyond 2050 and looking into the difficult questions becoming after 2050. But I think the political signal review is counterproductive in terms of the actions required.
Then Parliament can propose 30 years, 35, 40, 45 years, or 50, or whatever they think is the best thing. The years we took as, okay, it's probably the longest you can do these kind of long-term strategies. Everything beyond is really looking into the crystal ball, but 50 or 5 decades ahead is something that reasonably you can do with the modeling exercises.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Two things. One on this. The Parliament will probably go with what with the 2050. So because I mean, as Himke said, I mean we have Paris, we have we have also this based on 2050. So planning beyond 30 years, I would say. I mean, it's really. So I mean, I mean, I'm not sure time, but I'm pretty sure that we will go for 2050. And remember that there is a review clause of this governance package, which is dated to 26. So I mean, what's the point to discuss already 2070 now? I mean, stick to the agreement with the Paris Agreement, and so that's my point of view. Just want to come back quickly on the compliance issue, because you have to read carefully. I mean, there is no binding reporting requirement for the national plans. They think like that. So the Commission has even not introduced a binding reporting for the member states for the national plans. It's just through implementing act. So by implementing act, the Parliament is excluded from the process. But that's parenthesis. So first of all, before having a shall, and we will push for a shall that member states should report, at least we need a binding reporting template. There's nothing like that. And binding reporting requirement and a binding reporting template as part of the annex. And we will work on this.
Okay.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Okay.
Implementing it, it's not less binding.
We can to the. We have another online question.
Yes, we've got a question here from Sharon Turner asking if Oliver and Imke could clarify what they see the most appropriate link between 2030 and 2050 plans. So basically, is it possible to summarize some key actions that should be captured in the governance regulation?
I'm going to this Q&A session to you.
You want to start?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there is a governance proposal basically invites to think about proper 2050 governance in the sense of a long-term target as well. I think one of our findings shows that a target, the roadmap, basically we have a good target, but we have the roadmap which gives guidance to the member states and requires them to link their plans to that. I think the current governance regulation lacks a clear goal and common objective for the EU, and the Paris implementation requires, I think, to think about how that could be made a target. A 2050 target could be one way of doing it, and breaking that down maybe into carbon budgets. I think carbon budgets is something which is around for discussion already longer time. We know it's not only the discussion which is relevant for the climate is not only target. It's how much carbon do we release in the next decades to the atmosphere. So a budget approach is. It's time to think about a budget approach, and I think the governance regulation provides many options of increasing things.
Yes, I think I think what's important is that we have I think Arthur's distinction between a strategy, we have a long-term strategy on the one hand, which sort of provides strategic directions, relatively detailed strategic sense of the strategy, is sort of the goal, I think, of the 2050 plan. I think the 2030 strategy should then be more along the lines of a sort of a carbon budget type approach, as Imke was saying. So something that provides a clear plan as to how this will be implemented in the immediate term on a sector by sector basis. I think what's important though is that first I think I would that I think that when we prepare, first of all, the timing. I think to prepare the long-term plans with the 2030 plans, so that they're part of the same vision of how we go about things. So I think it's an important element. Secondly, I think that what's important is that there are certain insights, I think, that emerge from long-term plans that may need to be taken into account in the short term. So, for example, one goes about building the necessary capacity and value chains in certain sectors. One addresses the risks of implementing the long-term plan already in the short-term strategy. So avoid lock-in and so on. So a number of elements like this that need to be sort of clearly referenced, I think, in the short-term plan, or when I say short-term plan, the 2030 plan, that emerge from the 2050 analysis. I think, however, that I would still nevertheless leave some. I would like more flexibility on the 2050 plan than on the 2030 plan from a kind of a compliance perspective, in the sense that I think that even out to 2050 is a somewhat difficult process. It involves a lot of uncertainty. A number of pathways are possible, and they will depend on how technologies and other things develop. So I think one needs to allow the 2050 plan as being more sort of as I say, a strategy, a guide, but relatively sort of detailed one, to allow for concrete thinking. While the short-term plan should be, I think, much more anchored in a legal framework and subject to strict compliance where possible.
Thanks, Oliver. I had to take over from Tom, so I think he had to leave a bit earlier. So we take two more questions. Elsa, please.
So we talked about compliance, but I think I understand from all the speakers, and certainly Oliver, you showed it, that this governance regulation and the entire planning process is something more than just being about compliance and ensuring 2030 targets. And yet we see it being perceived by a lot of member states as another administrative burden and just compliance mechanism. So how would you plan to address that and shift the perception and show indeed that it's about broader societal challenges and meeting the Paris Agreement than just ticking boxes?
Thanks, Elsa. You want to respond?
Okay. I think what's important is that with governance proposal, we also do a major streamlining exercise, because if you look at the different elements that are being put into the governance proposal, they are being addressed at the moment in many different pieces of legislation, and it's particularly on the energy side. Around, I think, 60 pieces of legislation have different reporting, monitoring, planning requirements, and that are being all brought into a single place. So in that way, we are going to streamline and simplify the work for member states. And what we hope that at the end, all of these things are consistent. And like at present, you can have different angles on the energy sector when you look at different reports, and you sometimes think that even if they are coming from the same ministry, do they really hang together? Because of things are done on the energy side, for instance, fuel or whether it's energy production or whether it's energy demand. So that it's kind of, when you read these reports together, sometimes they don't hang together, and we would hope that with this exercise we get there. The compliance angle is a very important one. Compliance is something which is being regarded by member states as really coming with hitting them hard. So and what we is try to have a balance between the compliance elements, the hard compliance, the sorting elements, the kind of peer review elements that are in there. People have to look at each other plans because we also want to encourage regional cooperation so that people look at each other's national plans and see, does it work on the border between France and Germany, yes or no, on what the two countries are planning. And that is being allowed, these also softer elements that are there.
Thanks. Is there another question? Please.
Come back to the figure of 11 LCDS out of 28. How can you make sure to support or encourage member states that have some issues to develop LCDS, also in view of the national plans? How can you make sure to support them in providing the necessary strategies and national plans? Maybe capacity building in the national administration, or do you have any views on this?
This is basically a question to answer, just to respond from the Maximizer project perspective first, which is that this project is aiming to facilitate knowledge exchange and reflecting the results we are developing in this project. Like, for example, the methodology, now this evaluation results, and we are writing a recommendations paper, guidance paper for long-term strategy development, which will be out in June. So we have a couple of publications which we, first of all, discuss in this external reference group where some member states are present, representatives from member states are present, and we reflect it specifically back to the experts in the member states. This is how this project aims to reflect and get knowledge out to those working on these issues. But I think the rest of the main question directs to Arthur.
The number of 11 is a bit an unfair number. The information we get from member states is that they're all working on low emission development strategies. In some cases, are well advanced. In some cases, they got stuck. It's not an easy exercise to that. Bring all the different ministries together, do the consultations of stakeholders in an appropriate manner. So it takes time. Then if you have changes in government, which might give you a change in direction, like Denmark was mentioned, you might see things even put back into the law. I think that's probably what's going to happen to the US mid-century strategy that we saw come out after Paris. I think that's something that probably is going to be put into the draw again. So we will see what value that has. But it's a very, and then on the capacity building, I agree. And as I said, there is a number of member states who have asked for money so that they can hire consultants, research institutes in order to help them draft the plans. One example is Cyprus, another one is Slovenia. Poland even wants to now do their long-term strategy again. They have been asking for money, so there is also that possibility.
We're running towards the end. Is there any question in the room? Ulrike and Michelle, but very briefly, and then I'm closing.
Okay, thanks, Inga. So, first of all, the 70, I'm scary because this is probably mentally member states and everyone will then get very busy 2069. So it is, when it's a longer time period, it gives you a different feeling. 2050, it's already a long time away. We consider that the difficult issues should come way before 2050. And that's also kind of from the atmospheric point of view. So, but what I wanted to ask is, I'm worried about now, given the quality and urgency, and I agree that we're in a rush to start implementing everything, but still on the table now is really low in emissions. So what are the opportunities to raise it? Of course, the new NDC in 2020, the updated NDC, you didn't really elaborate on that, but then there were also some bars between 2020 and 2030, but I couldn't figure out the small print. What can actually do when the implementation of the legislation is in place, and you have really vision that science will tell you that is completely inappropriate, then you already have the legislative framework and you're implementing it, you're doing it. Can you still change it there? What has the Commission done to build this possibility to revise it so in this period?
Yes, I have on that last point, in the graphs that we planned for reviewing the legislation, so the legislative framework in the year 2024, in 2024 after the stock take. So this is one possibility. You can also look at the level of ambition in that context, because in the proposal it is based very open. We can look at all parts of legislation, and that would include the ambition. There's no limit in terms of, it doesn't say that if you do the review, you can only review something that goes beyond 2030. It's completely open. I know in Parliament and also in some member states, they want to be more specific on that. But okay, if you want to have an example on what could be done, when it comes to Commission proposals, they can be open. Well, we'll have to look at the political opportunities at the time. Let me back on this 2050 issue. Even if we were to reduce emissions by 95% or 98% in the year 2050, still 5% to be done afterwards. And that is going to be very difficult. If you look at the current IPCC reports in terms of what are you thinking of in terms of what needs to be done by then, from the Commission side, we believe it's good to have that in mind when you do your backcasting, because what we are doing, we say it's 2050 and then we backcast from that. But we believe you need to consider also what needs to happen afterwards, because it's the same argument why we are doing long-term strategies. And therefore, we believe this rolling thing is important. We have looked at 2050 already almost 10 years ago. So kind of in that time frame, that should really roll, really understand the complexities and the challenge that is ahead of you. And think that we can stop thinking in the year 2050, no. I also think that if the IPCC report comes out on the 1.5 degrees next year, I don't think that they will stop thinking in the year 2050. Understand also the challenges that will come in the year after 2050, and it's not meant as postponing anything. We simply should look at milestones that we need to ramp into the soil: 2040, 2050, 2060, 2070, and so on. So to understand the trajectory, as I said before.
Thank you. I have to close the meeting now. We are over time and we have many people online. It's left to me to give you a big thank you to the speakers. Thanks so much for sharing your views and insights. I think this debate is a very important start of a discussion we have in the next month more intensively by the point looking into it and the Council. So it's the right starting point, I think. Many important questions found, and we will have time to discuss them together. Thanks everybody being on the screen or on the phone or however joining, not being in the room and enjoying coffee and croissants. But yeah, thank you for taking the time. And Michael,
very last short word for you.
Just to thank you all, but I just wanted to make an announcement. So, and I heard today from most of you the word LED.
And LEDs, for me it's lamps because it's too late. and just the announcement is that we are having only the last trialogue on energy labeling on Tuesday evening, where I hope to conclude the Commission and the Council on the new energy label and come back to the A to G scale. So be ready by 10 or 11 p.m. on Tuesday to have an announcement there. It's about energy efficiency.
Thanks to everybody, and wish day. Please do not forget, for those in the room, to put your evaluation form in the box. Sarah is holding in her hands. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Ja, einfach nur nachher ist. Genau das Bild.
Yeah, no, but literally like my wife like answered the phone. That was my phone. She answered the phone. And she said, Ali, kind of then I thought, oh, I know. Oh, that's so. I was laughing. I didn't get it. I just like woke up. The cover's over. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. Because I and so, like, there were just so many things going on that I should have emailed to say I need to reschedule, but I just didn't know. That's great. Okay,
We have been very late sending the sound. Only last minute because we had not sufficient rest.
My question is great because it's really attention to this issue of like, there's lots of interest in it.
Yes.
I want to give you a hug now. Somebody say, yeah, they take it so close. Yeah. But there's something that's your role, right? Like your role is to propose.